Hi, everyone. Welcome to the GoldFish Report. I'm your host, Louisa. Today is Monday, December 23rd, 2019. This is our GoldFish Report number 419, and it is week 152 POTUS Report. Very important week. Here with my friend and co-host, the most dangerous mind in America, is my friend, the Fetz. How are you, Jim?
Oh, I'm fine, Louisa. We have had a minor ascension in the evangelical ranks for the editor of Christianity Today, a magazine founded by worldwide known evangelist Billy Graham, came out with an editorial condemning Trump for his abuse of power as immoral. Franklin Graham, who's Billy's son, who's been on an evangelical tour supporting Trump, has confronted him and suggested his father would have never tolerated this. It's an interesting development where I suspect that the editor of Christianity Today has some deep state connections.
Well, Jim. I'll tell you, in today's day and age, with people who are waking up to what's really happening, that is the first thing that we have to presume, isn't it? We have a lot to report on, folks. I can't wait to hear your stories on that, Jim, because we have, that's really what's going on. And I'm going to screen share, folks. There's a lot of new Q happening right now. So let's take a look at this real quick and what this all means. Okay, so I kind of scrolled back a little bit, and something big is coming. On the 19th, Q has posted the Epoch Times disclosed FISA abuse days after Carter Page FISA was issued. It's important to understand the sequence of things, that something big is coming. We also know that the back channels are created. This whole Q board and the back channels are not just created for patriots and other operatives in the field, but also other government leaders to keep them posted. Because when President Trump took office, it was very, very clear that, especially when he went to Saudi Arabia, it was very clear that he was rooting out the corruption. And the corruption that infiltrated from other countries into the United States, he was cutting ties with that corruption, and he was working to create a coalition, I would say, in my opinion, but I think there's evidence for it, that he was creating a coalition to end the human trafficking, to end the corruption, the money laundering, and of course the pay-to-play schemes that were going on within the government, specifically within the Clinton Foundation and her network. What we're talking about last week, as everybody saw, was this fiasco and charade. I'm sure, Jim, you have this in your slides as well, of this impeachment process. And Jim, I want you to jump in anytime you want here too, because this is just huge. Let's just take a look at this. Why are the two articles being held by Pelosi? Q posts. Will nothing actually impact the decision? I mean, will holding actually impact the decision of the Senate? Of course it will not. Okay, will holding actually provide a better scenario, public opinion, to Democrats?
I do address this in my stories, Louisa, and we have a prominent liberal Democrat attorney who testified before Congress on behalf of the Democrats saying it's unconstitutional withhold, and if it isn't sent to the Senate, Trump has not, in fact, been impeached.
Right, that's correct. He hasn't been impeached, because what has to happen is a process has to happen with the Senate. And here, this is what Q's talking about. Q's talking about, will holding these articles, delaying it, going to the Senate, actually be a better scenario for the Democrats? And the answer is no. Will it sway the votes? And the answer is no. Here he's saying the blackmail and threats no longer work, because you saw the one senator, the one Democrat who flipped and said that he was personally threatened if he didn't go along with this, with the
Louisa,
agenda.
Not only does it expose the hypocrisy of the urgency with which Pelosi insisted this had to be done, where Trump represented an existential threat, which is inconsistent with this extensive delay, but it's a form of quid pro quo, where Nancy Pelosi, as Speaker of the House, is trying to extort benefits from the Senate, which is a violation of the separation of the responsibilities of the House of the Senate, and is on a par with Joe Biden's threatening to withhold $1 billion in foreign aid unless Ukraine fired the prosecutor looking into Burisma and his son Hunter Biden. This is hypocrisy of the highest degree, and it's going to backfire massively on Pelosi, and the Democratic Party will suffer as a consequence.
Absolutely, Jim. And what the process here is that in order for the president to be impeached, he has to commit a crime. The president has committed no crime. So they're committing fraud, Jim, I think you'd agree, that they're committing fraud by making these accusations which are false.
They're unconstitutional, abuse of power, and this congressional thing. They aren't even in the Constitution as offenses that would warrant impeachment. So they're making it up flying by night. It's such a vague allegation as to be unconstitutional on its face, as Alan Dershowitz has observed.
Yeah. And here you can say, you know, haven't you figured it out yet? It's not about Trump's corruption, because the president has and does not engage in corruption. It's about making sure we don't find out about their corruption. That's what this is about.
Yeah.
That's what you just said, Jim. Absolutely. So what this is going to do is this is going to, step by step, it's going to expose how the crimes were committed. It's going to expose how these games, people need to get ready, because what's coming is huge. It's really, really huge. And I don't know that people are really, you know, ready and prepared for the amount of corruption that's going to be exposed. I know Jim and I are ready for it because we know about it already, right, my friend? It'd take an awful lot more than this to shock Jim. But last week, of course, everybody knows about this letter that the president shared with everybody. I'm going to screen share it. This was his protest to, this is the letter from Donald Trump to the Speaker of the House of Representatives. I'm just going to read just a few excerpts. I write to express my strongest and most powerful protest against the partisan impeachment crusade being pursued by the Democrats in the House of Representatives. This impeachment represents an unprecedented and unconstitutional abuse of power by Democrat lawmakers, unequaled in nearly 2.5 centuries of American legislative history, which you pointed out, Jim.
Abuse of power, Louisa, is what they accuse him of, and he's far appropriately reflecting back on them. That is their offense, not his.
Exactly, but that's how the deep state operates. They will accuse you of what they themselves are doing. So this is a form of what they call in psychology projection, where you don't want to take, when you don't want to take accountability for what you're doing, you project this on and accuse the other person of what you're doing. So this is what they're doing. And as Jim pointed out, let me continue to read. The articles of impeachment introduced by the House Judiciary Committee are not recognizable under any standard of constitutional theory, as Jim pointed out, interpretation, or jurisprudence. They include no crimes, no misdemeanors, and no offenses whatsoever. You have cheapened the importance of the very ugly word impeachment. So this is it. By proceeding with your invalid impeachment, you are violating your oaths of office. This is huge, Jim, because those oaths, right, are bonded. Those oaths are bonded, and the surety for those oaths those are bonded. And those bonds, who's holding those bonds? People like Fidelity and other companies who back those bonds, those oaths of office. That's what people only really understood how this worked. Everybody.
You can already see how well reasoned this is, Louisa, and yet the mainstream media has been attempting to discount it as somehow hysterical and inappropriate when it could not be more precise and suitable as a response.
Yeah, I mean, let me just continue for a minute, because this is really the highlight of what we're talking about. Right now, the president is at Mar-a-Lago. Actually, he's at the Trump International Golf Course playing golf. God help him, give him a day off and let him rest from this whole fiasco. So since the president has nothing public on his schedule, we're going to go into what has happened. This is history making. So let me continue. You dare to invoke the founding fathers in pursuit of this election nullification scheme. Yet your spiteful actions display unfettered contempt for America's founding, and your egregious conduct threatens to destroy that which our founders pledged their very lives to build. Even worse than offending the founding fathers, you are offending Americans of all faith by continually saying, I pray for the president, when you know this statement is not true, unless it means in a negative sense, casting a spell on them. That's what they're trying to do. It is a terrible thing that you are doing, but you will have to live with it, not I. Your first claim, abuse of power, is a completely disingenuous, meritless, and baseless invention of your imagination. You know that I had a totally innocent conversation with the president of Ukraine. Let me just make this clear, folks. What's going on here is that this is going to be part of history, and the president knows it. And he's putting because they denied him due process, because they denied him the opportunity to defend himself, he had to come out and put a statement out publicly about this impeachment to put his side of the story on the record. Because the House of Representatives is blocking that. They're denying even the president due process. So how is the president going to defend himself? And this is the only way he can. So the president, by all means, intended for this letter to be part of to be saved for posterity, okay? Because he knows that this is the only way to get at this point in time, this is the only way to get his defense on the record, is to make this public statement. So what you can do is go to the GoldFish Report on Twitter or on Facebook and take a look at this. The GoldFish Report blog is also going to have this letter on there, and you can look at the entire letter. The second claim, obstruction of Congress, is preposterous and dangerous. The House Democrats are trying to impeach the duly elected president of the United States for asserting constitutionally based privileges that have been asserted on a bipartisan basis by administrations of both political parties throughout our nation's history, so that they have the right to, specifically with Ukraine, has the right to request, assistance with crimes, with corruption. Right, Jim?
Not only are they not comporting themselves in accordance with the Constitution here, but they have shown themselves willing to rip it up by abolishing the Electoral College, which would mean that the smaller states play no role in the election of a president, because all the campaigning would then focus on the larger states, New York, California, Florida, Texas. It could never pass as an amendment because it requires 3/4 of the state to confirm, and 3/4 of the states or more would oppose. It just shows the Democrats could care less about the Constitution. They might as well be quoting George W. Bush when he said it's just a goddamn piece of paper.
Jeez. Well, this is how it works, though. What's going to happen is, even if they hold on to this, this is what Nancy Pelosi's options are. And Jim, please add to this if I've left anything out. She can hold on to these articles and indefinitely, almost. I don't know how long, but it can be perceived of as abandoned. I suppose the Senate could issue a statement that they're abandoned, and then just acquit the president, which they might do. We don't know. She could try to rewrite rules while she's holding on to these articles. She's probably going to try to rewrite rules. But what we do know, Jim, is that you can't be both the president. You can't be both the head of the House of Representatives and the Senate at the same time. She cannot change what the Senate does. Can the Senate act right now, or does the Senate have to wait to receive those articles? And I believe that they do have to wait to receive them.
Mitch McConnell has said, why should we worry about not receiving something we don't want in the first place? And the fact is, the longer she delays, the worse the Democrats look, because their whole emphasis was on the necessity of countering this imminent threat from the President of the United States, which was an absurd claim on its face, now shown to be totally hypocritical and baseless, because evidently the threat isn't even great enough that once the articles had been passed by the House, she's going to send them to the Senate. Unbelievable.
Well, and not only that, but in the way our government works, we have the three branches of government. If there's a dispute between one branch, let's say the House of Representatives, and the executive branch, with the president, who is then, if she doesn't resolve this, if she doesn't step in, or if she tries to change the laws or up to some other unscrupulous activity, then the Supreme Court gets to step in and make a decision on this. So, let's just say it does make it to the Senate, which I doubt it's going to, because they know they're going to be exposed. Why? Because the Senate will conduct hearings and will conduct investigations, and they will bring in witnesses, and they will.
Actually, Louisa, it's rather the opposite. It appears Mitch McConnell has prevailed in his desire to make it short and sweet. The problem for the House is that it's a form of extortion, in that the public is going to see so clearly that this was a totally fabricated event that they don't even have enough confidence to send it to the Senate, that it is going to damage the Democrats' prospects for 2020 very strongly.
Destroy it. You're absolutely right. But what I'm saying is I'm laying out what the options are, what they'll do. Like Mitch McConnell is saying is, obviously nobody really wants to deal with that, but there has to be a way to nullify this whole thing from the president's position. So the president's not concerned at all, although he did have to, publish that statement. We also have a statement here from the press secretary, Stephanie Grisham, which I'm going to read as well, just briefly. It's not a long letter like the president's, but she had some words to say as well. Today marks the culmination in the House of one of the most shameful political episodes in the history of our nation. Without receiving a single Republican vote and without providing any proof of wrongdoing, Democrats pushed illegal articles of impeachment against the president through the House of Representatives. Democrats have chosen to proceed on this partisan basis. In spite of the fact that the president did absolutely nothing wrong. Indeed, weeks of hearings have proved that he did nothing wrong. It's an impeachment sham, she goes on. She says the president's been denied fundamental fairness and due process under the law. But you know what, Jim, this happens every day. This happens to you. It's happening to you right now. It's happening to me right now in the courts that we're in. This is not new. But what they're doing is, and the president's taking the arrows for it, the president has agreed to take the arrows to show just how corrupt, our judiciary has been. Now, the president just last week nominated another 13 federal judges to bring the total to about 176 new judges. 187, I'm sorry. Last week, he added 13 more federal judges, which brings his total to 187 federal judges to interpret the Constitution. That's huge. That's important. But what happens is, that's what they're looking at. But again, realize this is so that you don't find out their corruption. They don't want you to find out what they've been doing. They don't want you to find out about all the money laundering, all the pay to play, how they sold out. They sold their position of power, their kickbacks, their pay to play. They betrayed America, and they know what's coming, and they want to avoid accountability. They've been getting away with it for so long, Jim. They don't, they don't want to get caught. But you know what I say? If you don't want to do the time, don't do the crime. They had a choice. Okay, moving along. A big deal. The president signed into law on the 20th, December 20th. Pardon?
You want to share this?
Yeah, I'll screen share it. The president signed into law the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2020. This authorizes fiscal year 2020 appropriations for the Department of Defense, national security programs, provides vital equipment modernization for our military branches, a well-deserved pay raise for our service members, 12 weeks of paid parental leave to all federal civilian employees, and most significantly, authorizes the creation of the 6th branch of armed services, the United States Space Force. You hear this, folks? As an armed force within the Department of Air Force. So here it does talk about more specifically that this, as the commander-in-chief, right? This is what he's doing with regard to the military. And wanted to show what some of the provisions include. It had to do with paid family leave for service members. I'm sorry, for federal employees. So let me just go to where that is. Whatever. Okay. The act purports to restrict transfers of detainees held at Guantanamo Bay, and he fully, and this is interesting, huh? Gitmo. We know it's very packed there right now. We also recall, Jim, remember, I think it was like a year ago, we reported on a certain reservists being called to go to Gitmo. So we know that it's been quite busy there. Here they're talking about keeping it open, that the president has full intentions to keep that detention facility open and use it. And he's also got, okay, so they wanted to try to restrict his power to do it, but as commander-in-chief, he has the authority to do those things. It also, this is what's huge here, and I'm going to be doing a lot of special reporting on the Air Force Space Command. So it does establish that the president gets to appoint the commander of the Air Force Space Command, may serve in the new office of Chief of Space Operations for a term of 4 years without another appointment by the president. Okay, that's interesting. What else do we have? Secretary appoint. Okay, so it's just a little bit more. You can read this in more detail, but this is huge. So it's finally funded. This new Space Force Armed Service Branch is finally funded. And it's going to be very interesting to see what comes out of this space policy, which I've talked about several times regarding HR 2262 and 1508 from last term. So this also provides for, let's see, I wanted to show the other parts. Okay, supply chain for counterintelligence task force. And also this talks about deadline on the president's nomination of a few members to the Defense Nuclear Facilities Safety Board and Senate confirmation. There's a lot in this bill. So you can go through it and take a look at all the details, because there's not a lot of time to elaborate on all of it right here. And this also talks about, as I said, that they're also increasing the family paid family leave. I think it's 13 weeks paid family leave for federal employees. So that's really a big deal. And, the president has always been supportive of families and always been helpful. Ivanka Trump is out there also trying to show her support and work on policy pertaining to family support for family assistance, because that we definitely desperately need that. And there's an awful lot more to report on. The signing of the China deal is imminent, folks. The president has said that the deal is pretty much done, and he's waiting any day to come to an agreement to sign that. And phase 2 is already in the works. But phase 1 definitely included, agreements about currency. And I think once the ink is dry on this, we're going to see make no mistake, I really think where we're going with this is to return to a gold-backed, gold standard for our currency, and to, as the president wants, to end the Fed. So that means our Federal Reserve dollars are going bye-bye, and we're going to have a new U.S. Treasury note. So whether that will be equivalent, I doubt it. I think the world has been revaluing their currencies. China just introduced a gold-backed yuan, which is now called the petro yuan. So that's huge. You have to know that's where it's all going. We're all going to have a gold-backed, gold standard to be working from in order to make it fair trade, because that's, of course, how you accomplish this. You can't have fair trade without having fair currency. You can't have countries manipulating their own currency in order to have unfair trade. So that's how it works. So these are good things. After 2020, Jim, good things, really good things are happening. I'm not at all in the least bit worried. I think this is all political theater. As you point out, my friend, that this is all actually quite scripted, because the Democrats always seem to fall on their own sword. Impalo, my friend. They always seem to fall on their own sword. They step into every trap the president leaves for them, because they have been hijacking, our country, our Constitution. They've been using it for their own personal private gain. And this is all going to be exposed. It's going to be huge, folks. Get ready, because it's going to be huge. Jim, take it from there, because I know you're going to be reporting on the stories that I wanted to report on also. So I'll comment as we go along.
Yes, Louisa. Nancy Pelosi wore black, is supposed to suggest it was such a solemn occasion, a somber day. Here we had the vote taking place in the House of Representatives on the articles of impeachment. Here was the first article being supported by Democrats, 229. Two voted against, one present, Tulsi Gabbard. Republicans unanimously opposing 195. One independent joined. Democrats, I believe that was Bernie's. No, Bernie's in the Senate. So it was 230 to 197 with one abstention and three non-votes. The internet reacting, noting her stern look at the Democrats when they started to rejoice and applaud when it was gavelled that the first article of impeachment had passed. Meanwhile, Tulsi voted present on impeachment as an active protest against two-party gridlock. She doubled down on her decision to vote on the two articles. After the vote, she issued a lengthy statement saying Trump violated public trust, but that voters would be able to hold him accountable in the 2020 election. I could not, in good conscience, vote against impeachment because I believe President Trump is guilty of wrongdoing, she explained. I also could not, in good conscience, vote for impeachment because removal of a sitting president must not be the culmination of a partisan process fueled by tribal animosities that have so gravely divided our country. I think that was highly appropriate. There we have, after the second article had been passed, Trump, meanwhile, was in Battle Creek, Michigan, saying it doesn't feel like an impeachment. And certainly the crowd was supporting him there. And as you have been explaining, it was all manifestly a sham. Do you wish to comment, or shall I proceed?
No, I think it was interesting, like you pointing out, that she has withheld and she's taking a lot of fire for it, but she's standing her ground and Trump respects her for that. He's publicly stated that. So very nice.
You're completely correct, Louisa. Meanwhile, Pelosi puts off sending impeachment to the Senate, leaving the trial in limbo. This is a very curious development. The day after the House cast its historic vote to impeach Trump, Speaker Pelosi put an abrupt halt to the proceeding, holding back from sending it to the Senate in a politically risky bid to exert control over the contours of an election year trial, with some leading Democrats pushing to delay transmittal and others advocating they be withheld altogether. The limbo is likely to persist into the new year. The House has left town for a 2-week holiday recess without taking votes to appoint impeachment managers required to start the process in the Senate. McConnell was entirely unmoved by Pelosi's tactics, delivering a speech Thursday evening in which he appeared barely able to contain his amusement at what he regarded as the speaker's missteps. I admit I'm not sure what leverage there is in refraining from sending us something we do not want, McConnell said with a wry smile from the Senate floor, but alas, if they can figure that out, they can explain it. Meanwhile, other House Democrats say they would prefer never to transmit the articles. Fine with me. Still, McConnell has a challenging political balance to strike as well, with a slim majority and a small group of moderates and politically vulnerable Republicans in his ranks who might want to hear from witnesses or otherwise ensure a balanced proceeding. He will have to find consensus on how to move forward. What's most interesting to me, Louisa, is that there are 4 or 5 senators who are running for president who have spoken out about impeachment during the presidential debates, who therefore ought to be disqualified as participating as members of the jury. I have yet to hear a single political commentator address that issue, but it seems to me to be very important. Here's Gabbard ripping Pelosi for delay of the impeachment articles. She is showing herself to be a really significant figure in politics in the USA today. Representative Gabbard criticized Speaker Pelosi after she said she would delay delivering House-passed impeachment articles against President Trump in an effort to ensure a fair trial in the Senate. I was surprised to hear that, Gabbard told Hill TV on Thursday, breaking with fellow Democrats who have rallied behind Pelosi. You can't kind of just shift and change and make up the rules as she goes along. If you're going to pursue the process, you've got to let it play out the whole way through. Today was very consequential, and not to take a stand one way or another over they have such great consequences. This country, I think, is quite difficult, said Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, criticizing Tulsi Gabbard. We are sent here to lead. Following her vote, Gabbard said she could not in good conscience vote either yes or no. Adding such an action should not be the culmination of a partisan process. I am standing in the center and have decided to vote present, she wrote. I could not in good conscience vote against impeachment because I believe President Trump is guilty of wrongdoing. Gabbard knows she's introduced a censure resolution, which she argued would highlight Trump's wrongdoing and call on the president to apologize to the American people for his actions. Her decision to vote present comes amid fears that Gabbard, who did not qualify for the next Democratic primary debate, plans to run as a third-party candidate, an accusation she has repeatedly denied. Meanwhile, President Trump has expressed his respect for Gabbard for her vote of being present during impeachment, as you have yourself observed. Meanwhile, Christianity Today is attacking Trump. Should evangelists like me support or oppose him? The editorial published this week in Christianity Today calling for President Trump to be removed from office highlights a difficult choice facing evangelicals like me in determining who to support in the November election. In the editorial, Christianity Today's editor-in-chief, Mark Galli, wrote, the President of the United States attempted to use his political power to coerce a foreign leader to harass and discredit one of the president's political opponents. This is not only a violation of the Constitution, more importantly, it's profoundly immoral. In my opinion, he's allowed himself to be played. That sounds like Democratic talking points. There's no evidence to support it. Meanwhile, evangelicals signed letter against Christianity Today editorial as a political clamor caused by a top Christian magazine's call to remove President Trump from office continues to reverberate. 200 conservative evangelicals closed ranks further around Trump on Sunday. In a letter to the president of Christianity Today magazine, the group of evangelicals chided editor-in-chief Mark Galli for penning an anti-Trump editorial published Thursday that they portrayed as a dig at their character as well as the president. Your editorial offensively questioned the spiritual integrity and Christian witness of tens of millions of believers who take seriously their civic and moral obligations, the evangelist wrote to the magazine's president, Timothy Dalrymple. Meanwhile, Reverend Franklin Graham, Billy Graham's son, where Billy founded the magazine Christianity Today, is spotlighting Trump's evangelical support amid the impeachment threat. The Reverend Franklin Graham did not utter the word impeachment as he spoke to thousands of Christians here last week, the latest stop on a long-running tour he has dubbed Decision America, a title with political and religious undertones. Louisa, I invite your comments on this. Graham has spoken up very forthrightly that his father would have opposed what the editor-in-chief has done with a journal his father founded.
I think that it's all political, Jim. I think that these things are gonna, anyone who has dirt in the game, you know what I mean? They're going to be against the president, and they're going to try to discredit him in advance, thinking somehow that that's going to help their case, but it won't. So, I mean, even, there's a lot of shady business going on, folks. Get ready. It's all going to be exposed. It's going to be huge.
Right about that. Here's a fascinating report. House Senate impeachment impasse. Would mean Trump wasn't impeached at all, Harvard law professor. Well, Nancy Pelosi threatens to withhold articles of impeachment passed Wednesday night by the House. Harvard law professor Noah Feldman said that President Trump isn't technically impeached until the House actually transmits the articles to the Senate. Feldman, who testified in front of the House Judiciary Committee's impeachment proceedings earlier this month at the request of the Democrats, argues in a Bloomberg op-ed that the framers' definition of impeachment assumed that impeachment was a process, not just a House vote. And that strictly speaking, impeachment occurred and occurs when the articles of impeachment are presented to the Senate for trial. And at that point, the Senate is obligated by the Constitution to hold a trial. If the House does not communicate its impeachment to the Senate, he said, it hasn't actually impeached the president. If the articles are not transmitted, Trump could legitimately say he wasn't truly impeached at all. That's because impeachment under the Constitution means the House sending its approved articles to the Senate, with House managers standing up in the Senate and saying the president is impeached. As for the headlines we saw after the House saying Trump impeached, those are media shorthand, not a technically correct legal statement. So far, the House has voted to impeach. Future tense Trump. He isn't impeached, past tense, until the articles go to the Senate and the House members deliver the message. Noah Feldman. Pelosi, meanwhile, won't transmit the articles until the Senate holds what she considers a fair trial, roughly modeled after England's impeachment procedures. The framers in Article 1 of the Constitution gave the House the sole power of impeachment, while giving the Senate the sole power to try all impeachments. Article 2 outline says the president shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. There's more. But we can say with some confidence that only the Senate is empowered to judge the fairness of its own trial. That's what the sole power to try all impeachment means. If the House votes to impeach but doesn't send the articles to the Senate or send impeachment managers there to carry its message, it hasn't directly violated the text of the Constitution, but the House would be acting against the implicit logic of the Constitution's description of impeachment. A president who has been genuinely impeached must constitutionally have the opportunity to defend himself before the Senate. That's built into the constitutional logic of impeachment, which demands a trial before removal. To be sure, if the House just never sends its articles of impeachment to the Senate, there can be no trial there. That's what sole power to impeach means. In closing, Feldman says, if the House never sends the articles, then Trump could say with strong justification that he was never actually impeached, adding, and that's probably not the message congressional Democrats are hoping to send. Meanwhile, Tom Luongo, Pelosi's coup attempt is now open warfare. There will be casualties. The Democrats declared war this week, not on Donald Trump, but on the United States and the Constitution. What started as a coup to overturn the 2016 election has now morphed into a civil war that Speaker Nancy Pelosi presided over the passage of a bill which creates a clear constitutional crisis. And that means we have multiple factions vying for control of our government, the definition of a civil war. In passing these articles of impeachment against President Trump, Congress has arrogated to itself powers it does not have. The first article asserts a motive to Trump's action to invalidate his role as chief law enforcement officer for the country. It doesn't matter if you like him or any president having this power, he still has it. Read that first article and apply it to a country other than Ukraine, where Trump didn't have probable cause for investigation into corruption and malfeasance there. That could be abuse of power. But this happened in Ukraine, where Trump clearly had probable cause. The following is the scenario the first impeachment article is asserting as a basis for abuse of power, although ascribing political motives to the president. Right. One day, President Trump wakes up and says, shit, Joe Biden's leading me in the polls. I need to do something about this. So Trump twirls his orange comb over and calls up the Prime Minister of Armenia, a Russian ally, to whom we pledged aid. Since it's a Russian ally and Trump may have colluded with the Russians, they would be a good candidate to help him. But Joe Biden has no history of diplomacy or oversight in Armenia as vice president. There's no record of any contact of any kind with Biden in Armenia, for argument's sake. Trump then, during the phone call, shakes down the Armenian PM for that aid, explicitly saying he must create dirt on Joe Biden or he would withhold appropriated aid funds to the country. Then, after getting caught Trump tries to hide the record of the phone call by hiding behind executive privilege. That would be abuse of power and an impeachable offense. It would be regrettable but indefensible that the odious jackals in Congress were right to impeach him. They would actually be defending the Constitution and fully within the right. But that's not what happened. Biden was put in charge of Ukraine by President Obama. He had full discretion on policy toward Ukraine and was caught on tape bragging about doing exactly what the impeachment article is accusing Trump of doing, shaking Ukraine down for favors in order to get $1 billion in aid, which he stated at the Council on Foreign Relations. We have it on tape. We played it on this show before. Since the prosecutor who Biden had fired was investigating corruption into his son Hunter's involvement with Ukrainian gas company Burisma, this admission is pretty damning, showing clear personal motive to use his office to stop investigation into his family. This is abuse of power. This is subjecting U.S. foreign policy to the whims of an elected official, squelching an investigation into his personal family, using the office for personal gain. So when viewed through this lens, the first impeachment article is a complete lie. Trump didn't do the things asserted. The transcript of the phone call with Ukrainian President Zelensky proves that. Trump made the phone call public immediately. The phone call and Trump's order to review the foreign aid were contemporaneous, but not conditional. If you have a non-charitable view of the president, it may raise some questions, but there was probable cause here. Opinions on Trump. Opinions on Trump do not add up to high crimes and misdemeanors. The implications of this impeachment article are, however, staggering. It says explicitly that the U.S. president cannot discharge his duties as a law enforcement official if the person of interest is someone of the opposite party or a potential electoral opponent. It says that probable cause is not a standard for investigation, only political considerations. That's a clear violation of Congress's role. Congress writes laws, the president executes them. If the Congress wanted to assume law enforcement powers, it should work to amend the Constitution. This is a clear example of why impeachment is a political process, not a legal one. But if they are going to act this politically, at least they should put the veneer of legality upon it. Even the equally odious Republicans who impeached Bill Clinton did that. But in asserting this as an offense, Congress seeks to place the legislative branch as superior to the executive in matters of law enforcement and implementation. That's a clear violation of the separation of powers. It may suck that the guy holding to the office of the presidency is someone you don't like or not willing to turn a blind eye to corruption, but doing his job is not a high crime or misdemeanor. The second article is even worse, because it asserts the power to subpoena members of the executive branch under the impeachment inquiry into the first article. And since Congress has sole authority over impeachment, no judicial review of his subpoena power can be made. This is fully unconstitutional, since it subverts the power of the judicial branch to settle disputes between the executive and legislative branches established by the Constitution. Pelosi and company are broadening the definition of sole power of impeachment to say whatever Congress deems as worthy of an impeachment inquiry is, therefore, and other branches have no say in the matter. I'm no legal scholar, but when I can see how ridiculous these articles are, then you know this has nothing to do with the law, everything to do with power. And the reality is, what this impeachment is really about is distracting and covering up the multiple layers of corruption in U.S. foreign and domestic policy stretching back decades. Many of the trends emanating from the event compound, the FISA warrants improperly granted connect directly to the Clintons, Jeffrey Epstein, William Browder, and the rape of Russia in the post-Soviet 90s. We're talking about an entire generation or more of U.S. officials and politicians implicated in some of the worst crimes of the past 30 years. The stakes for these people are existential. This is why they are willing to risk a full-blown constitutional crisis and civil war to remove Trump from office. They know he's angry at them now. This is personal as well as philosophical. Trump is a patriot, a narcissist, and a gangster. That's a powerful combination of traits. The polls are shifting his way on this, as the average person knows this impeachment is pathetic. They are tired of the Democrats' games the same way British voters are over the arguments against Brexit. In the end, we'll know if Trump has his ducks in a row in how Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell plays his cards versus Pelosi. If McConnell pussyfoots around and gives Pelosi anything on how the trial in the Senate is conducted, then the fix is in and Trump is gone. But if McConnell shuts this down, then what comes next will be a righteous smackdown of Trump political opponents that will make the phone call with Zelensky look like a routine call to Domino's for a double pepperoni. Either way, this coup attempt by Pelosi is now open warfare. There will be casualties. Louisa, I think that's quite a brilliant summation of the situation.
It sure is, Jim. Am I on mute? No. Look, it is brilliant. We don't have a crystal ball. We don't know what they're going to do. But what we do know is this. They can't, even if they try to hold this indefinitely, the president still can do something. He has the power of something that we need to talk about, and that is called the Writ of Mandamus. The president can petition the Supreme Court. A writ of mandamus basically means we command. So that what this is an order from a superior court to a subordinate or to another branch, right, in this case, to do or forbear from doing a specific act for which a body is obliged to do under the law, or refrain from doing something, which is in the nature of public duty or statutory duty. Okay, so this is if you're suffering a grievance. This is a legal duty. This can compel the court to remedy this defect of justice, okay? This is called a writ of mandamus. The president has this right now. He could write this today if he wanted to and, say to the Supreme Court, you need to step in and make a decision. You need to order this body of a government to do what it's elected to do what it's uh, um, sworn to do, and has the duty to do. Yes, Jim.
Technically correct, but politically it would be silly. He's happy to have the Democrats hanging out there on a limb. He's happy to have impeachment in limbo. Mitch McConnell can outplay Nancy Pelosi any day of the week, 24/7. She has committed a colossal blunder. Let them hang out there and pay for it politically.
Sure. Either way, Jim, either way, if they do nothing and they hold on to it, the American people are going to see this is a farce, because they're not moving forward with. They're holding on to it because they know that they only have control in the House, not in the Senate, and that this is, look at her face here. This is a game. This is a game to her, and she's destroying the Constitution. More to say.
By Major Danny Surgeon, USA, retired, on the United States of impeachment. Trump's real sin: hijacking the establishment's failed foreign policy. How exactly did I get here? My political journey has somehow taken me from canvassing for Obama north of Fort Knox, Kentucky in 2008 to voting for Bernie Sanders in the Democratic primary outside of West Point, New York in 2016, to Gulp, defending Trump against impeachment in 2019. What a long, strange trip it has been, as they say. The truth is, I couldn't sleep last night and have been watching CNN's wall-to-wall impeachment coverage since 4 a.m. When the clock struck a reasonable hour on East Coast time, and once I couldn't contain my frustration any longer, I called my father. Now, Dad and I are political opposites. No, that's too mild. We are toxically antithetical. A bit of a backstory. He and I have gone months without speaking in the past over arguments surrounding the Iraq War and other polarizing political topics. It's gotten ugly at times. Years ago, we called an armistice and agreed, for the most part, to limit our daily conversation to grandkids and the New York Yankees. Dad voted Trump. I was a Bernie bro who held my nose and cast for Team Hillary. Yet, against all odds, we agree mostly that, though for perhaps different reason, the Democrats' impeachment crusade is equally parts distraction and farce. As we took turns venting this morning, it struck me that in hyper-polarized red team, blue team America, our middle ground discussion must be about as rare or mythical as a unicorn. Look, I know I'm about to get hammered as soon as this piece hits the web. I'm not all that naive. Most left-leaning publications wouldn't likely have touched it. The few mainstream liberal friends I have left may bolt, and online critics, whether famous or nameless, will once again slap me with a standard label: Trump apologist, Putin stooge, Russian asset, and or blatantly un-American. So it goes. Nevertheless, no matter the cost, count me a free speech nostalgist. Whatever principles I possess demand that I throw my 2 cents in. Allow me one caveat, which my pops won't like. Personally, I think Trump is utterly unfit for office, in part due to his temperament, but mainly because of his policies. What a novel thought, I know. So I'll save you the suspense. I ain't going to vote for the guy, ever. Furthermore, I think Trump's committed plenty of impeachable acts, mainly in the foreign policy area, from overseeing U.S.-abetted unsanctioned war crimes in Yemen to escalating America's bombing of several nations upon whom Congress has not declared war. Problem is, as I've written, the same can mostly be said of baby Bush and Saint Obama. We all know the DNC machine has zero stomach for criticizing the latter, no matter how mildly. All that said, I truly believe that Ukraine Gate, like Russia Gate before it, was a dangerous charade, smoke and mirrors from the start. The entire Russian collusion angle, no matter how hard MSNBC liberals wished it were otherwise, never amounted to much of anything. In fact, the whole masquerade served and serves mainly as a cudgel for establishment Dems and their media lackeys attempt to delegitimize a duly elected president from the very moment he was elected. I know. The Electoral College is a travesty, an undemocratic anachronism. I agree wholeheartedly. Still, according to the rules of the game, Trump won. Period. Matters deteriorate from there, unfortunately. So polarized, so tribal has Washington become that the Democrats marched down this impeachment road knowing full well that it didn't stand a chance of removing Trump. No one seriously believed the Republican-led Senate, especially with ice-cold Mitch McConnell at the helm, would convict this president. Proof positive came this morning when first Nancy Pelosi, then Representative James Clyburn, hinted they might even withhold the impeachment articles from the Republican Senate indefinitely or forever. Say again? So what was this all for then exactly? Clearly, the entire process constituted little more than political masturbation from Jump Street, although admittedly it's been and will continue to be a boon for the media. Like pornography, impeachment theater makes for great if guilt-ridden entertainment, which is precisely the business the media is in these days. There was hardly an ounce of statesmanship-like bipartisanship in yesterday's vote, and there won't be any going forward either. Not a single Republican crossed the aisle to censure the president. Only 2 Democrats voted against impeachment. This nearly clean party divide is as instructive as it is disturbing. Consider an historical comparison. Even before Nixon's far more deserved impeachment came up for a full floor vote in the House, key Republican senators told him he'd lost their confidence. He resigned almost immediately. It's hard to imagine such a scenario on either side of the aisle in our tortured present. Tulsi Gabbard at least showed some political courage. Even Meghan McCain referred to Tulsi's balls of steel and voted president rather than with her party. Gabbard wasn't prepared to vote nay, and admittedly that may be due to limited political expedience, a last lifeline to what remains of her Democratic connection. Seen in another light, though, hers amounts to a plea for moderation, for bipartisanship. She'd said previously that her decision on impeachment would depend on part on whether there'd be cross-aisle consensus, and of course there wasn't. In the email I received from her campaign this morning, worth quoting at length, she explained it thus: a house divided cannot stand, and today we are divided. Fragmentation and polarity are ripping our country apart. This breaks my heart and breaks the hearts of all patriotic Americans, whether we are Democrats, Republicans, or independents. So today I come before you to make a stand for the center, to appeal to all of you to bridge our differences and stand up for the American people. My vote today is a vote for much needed reconciliation and hope that together we can heal our country. When the smoke clears and Election Day 2020 passes, I, for one, wouldn't be surprised if Tulsi Gabbard leaves the Democratic Party and joins her friend Bernie Sanders as an independent. The enormous elephant in the proverbial impeachment room, though, is a little matter of what U.S. policy toward Ukraine and Russia should be. That ought to be at least part of the rub, no? There are, I submit, serious questions worth asking about Obama's and the entire establishment's preferred strategy on this front. The late stage Obama team, and certainly had she been elected, Hillary's gang, seemed intent in the wake of Crimea in Ukraine on drumming up a new Cold War with the world's other major nuclear power. Is this warranted? Is it smart? Count me doubtful. Furthermore, who exactly are America's partners in Ukraine? Well, it might be inconvenient to admit, but a solid chunk are legitimate fascists, neo-Nazis, in fact. Okay, Trump shouldn't have used the language he did with Ukraine's president. His transactional style strikes me as immature and unstatesmanlike. That said, is it truly in the interests of the U.S. to arm military factions, some army, some militia, in a proxy war with Russia? It didn't end so well last time Russia played that very game a few decades back in Afghanistan. Ukraine is as near to Russia as Mexico is to Texas. Thus, logic, or even a simple glance at the map, should put to rest the notion that the whole proxy campaign has anything to do with the well-worn fiction that the U.S. must fight the Russians there rather than over here. No, I'm sorry. The Democratic and Republican National Security Insider Plan strikes its author as terrifyingly dangerous, a terrifyingly dangerous form of brinksmanship. Another potential result of the impeachment show is what it forebodes. In the future, expect both parties, whenever they are in the opposition, to treat every election loss as evidence that the new president is illegitimate. Impeachment proceedings might just become the new normal. Hardly, if my memory of high school civics serves me, the intent of the founding fathers. Sure, maybe Mitch McConnell started down this road with his post-Obama election statement. The single most important thing we Republicans want to achieve is for President Obama to be a one-term president. Even if we grant them that, the Democrats have exponentially upped the ante. Mark my words. Americans will come to regret the escalation when Washington politics fracture. Is it even possible even further in the years to come? Finally, I'd be remiss if I didn't address the distraction aspect of the all Trump, all impeachment, all the time phenomenon. Trump isn't going anywhere. In fact, I predict he'll win by an even larger margin in 2020. Nothing tangible, after all, will come of this vote. Not a thing will change. So here's the real pity. As the show unfolds over the next several months, impeachment will suck all the air out of the actually important problems and stories of the day. Meanwhile, the forever wars will rage, and U.S. foreign policy, along with the world itself, will sink ever deeper toward hell in a handbasket. Impeachment will bury the true scandal of the moment. The Afghanistan papers, remember those? Yemen will keep getting bombed. Iraq will drift toward yet another collapse. Israeli apartheid will cement ever further. And India's Prime Minister Modi will escalate his potentially civil war-inducing suppression of Muslims. Through all that, count on one thing. America will remain paralyzed, distracted. Last night, all the female Democrats in the House, at Pelosi's behest, one assumes, wore black to mark the seriousness of their faux somber occasion. Turns out the attire was totally appropriate, if for the wrong reasons. Black befit the moment, not because Trump behaved badly, but because the Democrats just ushered in the age of impeachment, of sustained partisanship, of ignoring the real scandals and existential threats before this wayward republic of ours. With that, I yield the floor. Brilliant piece, Louisa. Right. From a guy who's unsympathetic to Trump, but nevertheless see clearly the dimensions of this impeachment and the damage it's doing to the republic.
Well, and also the destruction of the party itself. I mean, this has to lead to, look, the whole party. She's the only one who voted present, but the whole party was totally partisan. Everybody noticed. He pointed this out adequately, right? This is pretty much, and once people realize, Jim, the extent of why they want to impeach the president, because they don't want their crimes to be exposed. it will be the end of the democratic, it'll be the end of the two-party system. And we will restore our original republic after this, but it's going to be a mess. That's my opinion.
And there are 31 freshman Democrats who came in during the midterm who were elected in red states that Trump had carried. I predict a minimum of 27 will not be returning to the House of Representatives, which the Republicans will regain control.
Right. Well, Jim, we have those 400, almost 140,000 sealed indictments. The first one, according to Q, is going to bring down the House. I mean, it's going to, the first unsealed indictment, the major unsealed indictment, I believe, may be Comey. I'm sorry, not Comey, Brennan. So whether it's Comey or Brennan, it's going to be huge, Jim, and it's going to start unraveling the whole thing.
Pelosi and Chuck Schumer are among those indicted.
I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah, they ought to be arrested. That's what they ought to be. They're committing treason against our country by committing fraud, using their public office for political purposes.
Just to continue, Pelosi's lies expose criminal intent behind coup plot against Trump. The impeachment coup, and Trump has called it a coup, and it is a coup, may actually backfire in a big way. The oligarchy in the US, the UK, and internationally is panicked since the Horowitz report has exposed a criminal conspiracy by the US and British intelligence agencies to carry out a coup against President Donald Trump. Even Der Spiegel in Germany ran a cover story expressing their horror that despite the Russiagate and the impeachment fraud, Trump looks like he will win the next election. Bill Binney, former head of the technical division of the National Security Agency, who designed the NSA programs to search out terrorists, but resigned when the program was used and sent to spy on virtually everyone in the world, has proven conclusively there was no Russian hack of the computers at the Democratic National Committee, the core of the Russiagate hoax. He reviewed this evidence on LaRouche's Fireside Chat national call-in website on December 12th and is willing and anxious to get the story out across the U.S. and internationally. He came on my own show, Louisa, The Raw Deal, and confirmed exactly what we have here, which we've reported many times. Binney and former CIA operative Larry Johnson, who appeared with him, point to the fact that General Michael Flynn, the former head of the Defense Intelligence Agency in the Obama administration and Trump's first national security advisor, was targeted in the Russiagate witch hunt precisely because it exposed that the Obama administration's arming of so-called moderates in the regime change war against Bashar al-Assad's government in Syria was actually going to the al-Qaeda terrorist network, and worse, that the Obama administration was doing this intentionally. In the eyes of British and Obama intelligence networks, Flynn's crime was that he wanted to establish friendly ties with Russia, as does President Trump. Helga Zepp LaRouche yesterday in her weekly Strategic International webcast warned that the ongoing weaponization of the impeachment process by the Democratic Party leadership is a sign of desperation, that they fear correctly that in the 2020 election, they cannot win an honest election campaign. Constitutional scholar Alan Dershowitz make the point that a very dangerous precedent is being created by destroying the Republican conception of the presidential system and replacing it with a British parliamentarian system where a prime minister can be gotten rid of just because of a majority in the parliament. The British imperial division of the world with NATO versus the Warsaw Pact is dead. Macron called NATO brain dead, while Trump called it obsolete. When the Soviet Union disintegrated in 1991, NATO lost its raison d'etre, and the confrontation against Russia and China is just being built up to justify making big salaries for bureaucrats in the NATO apparatus and the military-industrial complex. It is not too late to say that NATO should be replaced with a completely different system, a security architecture which includes Russia and which includes China, because the present confrontation policy is leading to war. It is clear that Trump is trying to have a decent relationship with Russia and China. Wow. If Hillary Clinton had become president, we could have had World War III already. It's time for NATO to fold up. We need a new approach, an approach that guarantees the long-term survivability of the planet and humanity. A step in that direction was achieved in Spain this week as of December 2nd through 13th. COP25 conference for Malthusian genocide under the cover of fake climate change hoax fell flat on its face, unable to come up with any new dictates for stopping industrial development under the lie that global warming is threatening the human race. While many blame President Trump for undermining the Malthusian scheme, and he deserves his praise, is primarily due to the persistent efforts of the LaRouche movement over the past 50 years to expose the British Malthusians as the stormtroopers for the new fascist movement to justify the depopulation of the world. With this defeat of the Malthusians, the forces for human progress may take the offensive for progress, for a new Bretton Woods, for global cooperation in the new Silk Road, and for cooperation between the great cultures of civilization in a new paradigm for the human race. This is all now backfiring on the coup plotters, both those in the US and those in the UK, Ukraine, and elsewhere. As President Trump tweeted yesterday, former FBI Director Comey, who ran the Rushgate hoax, is now looking at serious prison time. Meanwhile, Schiff, body of evidence that Pence may have known about Trump's Ukraine call, shifting attention to the vice president, because after all, Louisa, if they can impeach the president and the vice president, then guess who becomes president of the United States, the third in line, after the second after the president, Nancy Pelosi, Speaker of the House. This becomes a bit too transparent. Representative Adam Schiff, chair of the House Intel Committee, talks with Rachel Maddow about the supplemental testimony by State Department official Jennifer Williams that Mike Pence has made classified. Schiff says the material sheds light on the vice president's knowledge of Donald Trump's Ukraine scheme and does not contain anything that needs to be classified. Rachel Maddow, let me ask you about part of this that remains under your purview even now as the impeachment effort has produced these two articles against the president. And that is that you seem still to be pulling on some threads here, including some potentially provocative and consequential ones. I'm thinking specifically about a letter you sent to the vice president's office this week, in which you raised questions as to what the vice president knew about the president's behavior, the president's scheme in Ukraine, and thereby essentially his potential involvement in any cover-up of that behavior by the president. Are you actively looking at Vice President Mike Pence and his role in this scandal? And should we expect further revelations, either related to the vice president or related to the other core parts of these allegations that have resulted in this impeachment tonight? Representative Schiff, well, we have acquired a piece of evidence, classified submission by Jennifer Williams, something that she alluded to in her open testimony, that in going back and looking through her record, she found other information that was pertinent to that phone call. We asked her about and made that submission. There is nothing that should be classified in that submission, yet the vice president's office has said they're going to assert classification, or it's classified. It's not proper to classify something because it would be embarrassing or incriminating. And that summation does shed light on the vice president's knowledge, and we think the American people should see it. Certainly any senators in the trial should have access to it. It just goes to show that there is a body of evidence, documentary and otherwise, that administration figures from the president on down to include the vice president do not want the American people to see or know. And the question is, will they succeed? Will the cover-up succeed, or will the Senate insist on what we were not able to obtain in the House? And that is a White House that will comply with lawful process. Adam Schiff's new target is Vice President Michael Pence. It's very clear that's what's going on, as confirmed by his appearance on Rachel Maddow. Louisa.
Right, because if they remove Trump and they remove Pence, then guess who gets the job?
Amazing, isn't that?
The only one morally qualified for that position, Jim.
That's embarrassingly bad, Louisa. I mean, they're not going to get away with any of this. Meanwhile, the New York Times report John Durham seeking CIA Director Brennan's communications. And Durham looks like U.S. Attorney Durham is looking for what Comey outlined in the Crown material discussion. First, the article from the New York Times, emphasis 9. The federal prosecutor scrutinizing Russia investigation has begun examining the role of former CIA Director John Brennan and how the intelligence community assessed Russia's 2016 election interference. According to 3 persons briefed on the inquiry, John H. Durham, the U.S. attorney leading the investigation, has requested Mr. Brennan's emails, call logs, and other documents from the CIA. He wants to learn what Mr. Brennan told other officials, including the former FBI Director James Comey, about his and the CIA's views of a notorious dossier of assertions about Russia and Trump. Brennan appears to have played an absolutely crucial role here, Louisa. U.S. Attorney Durham appears to be looking for a very specific email written by John Brennan to James Comey, because Comey wrote another email saying Brennan is insisting the Crown material be included in the intel assessment. You remember the Crown material? The Christopher Steele dossier, called Crown material by FBI agents within the small group during the 2016 political surveillance operation, reflects the unofficial British intelligence aspect of the dossiers provided by Steele. In May of 2019, former House Oversight Chair Trey Gowdy stated there are emails from former FBI Director James Comey that outline instructions from CIA Director John Brennan to include the Crown material within the highly politicized intelligence community's assessment. The sources previously outlined how the December 29, 2016 Joint Analysis Report on Russian cyber activities was a quickly compiled bunch of nonsense about Russian hacking. The Joint Analysis Report was followed a week later by the January 7, 2017 Intel Community Assessment. The ICA took the ridiculous construct of the JAR and then overlaid a political narrative that Russia was trying to help Donald Trump. The ICA was the brain trust of John Brennan, James Clapper, and James Comey. While the majority of content was from the CIA, some of the content within the ICA was written by FBI agent Peter Strzok, who held a unique insurance policy interest in how the report would be utilized, where NSA Director Mike Rogers would not sign up. And Louisa, it appears Mike Rogers has been working with them. Meanwhile, the FISA has released a previously classified Judge Collier order. She is the president, the head of the FISA court, asking for what the FBI and other agencies have done to square this away. This is a very significant development. I shall not read the details, but Judge Collier has 3 questions, orders, and instructs for the Department of Justice to inform the court of what previous FISA application Kevin Kleinsmith was involved in, where he appears to have played a crucial role. Inform the court what steps have been taken to review the potential of those applications who also contain fraudulent information, and inform the court what the hell they did to punish this gross behavior from the FBI Office of Legal Counsel. Keep in mind, Judge Collier wrote this article December 5th prior to her seeing the full unredacted IG report on FISA viewed of December 9th. So it's likely there will be more to come as an outcome of this mess. Meanwhile, Rush Limbaugh says it all. What the hell is this, folks? They exonerate Hillary because they think she didn't intend to do what she did. They can't find that Trump did anything, but they think he intended to do what he didn't do, and so we need to impeach him. Russ put his fingers right on the hypocrisy of the whole thing, Louisa, from beginning to end.
I agree, Jim. I agree. There's new Q posts out there too, showing up right now. But I also wanted to mention that Q also brought up Admiral Rogers, who met in the Trump Tower with President Trump during his campaign to inform him of this spying, and he's going to be taking a very major role pretty soon in this whole thing.
This guy turns out to be a good guy, a man of integrity, a naval officer. Marine Corps is a branch of the Navy. I, as a former Marine Corps officer, am very proud of Mike Rogers for standing up for the Constitution.
Thanks for saying that, Jim. I appreciate that too. I'm sure he does as well.
Meanwhile, Jewish groups challenge Trump's alleged anti-Semitism executive order. Israeli partisan Zionists have pushed to equate anti-Zionism to anti-Semitism. This was being recognized as a way to limit free speech, but is being opposed by Jewish groups like Jewish Voice for Peace and J Street. Also, Israeli-born activist Miko Piled weighs in on the topic in a 6-minute interview. Is boycotting Israel anti-Semitic? On RT America, check out our podcast. Anti-Zionism is not anti-Semitism. a point I made back in 2008 in my first public speech during a Ron Paul freedom rally on the grass outside of the Capitol. That would subsequently be published under the title 9/11 and the neocon agenda. Rabbi Louisa Wise at Jewish Voice of Peace in an email. Trump is bad for the Jews, sent on December 14th. If you're like me, you are infuriated by Trump, who just signed an executive order on Wednesday that claims to combat anti-Semitism on college campuses, but actually is designed to shut down Palestinian rights activists. It is a racist, repressive attempt to silence student and academics. The fight is just getting started, and we can't let it disappear from the headlines. We plan to run an ad in the Hill to tell everyone in D.C. this act has nothing to do with protecting Jews, and we need to raise $13,500 in the next 48 hours to secure the spot. Trump's executive order will do nothing to keep Jewish students safe. It won't protect against Nazis or Nazi recruitment. It won't prevent campuses from scheduling important events on Jewish holidays. It won't prevent Jewish religious spaces from armed attackers. What it will do is incentivize administrators to create harsh rules, even against the mildest activism for Palestinian rights, or risk their institutions' federal funding. Trump and his cronies are cracking down on student activism because they know it's working. Since the Palestinian call for BDS began, there have been over 70 successful campus votes on divestment and for resolutions in support of the Palestinian-led boycott. From an email we see through Trump's executive order sent by Jessica Smith, Chief Operating Officer at J Street on the 12th. When President Trump issued a controversial executive order yesterday related to anti-Semitism on college campuses, confusion abounded. But at J Street, we recognized the impact of the executive order right away and understood exactly why it's so dangerous. The president's executive order is virtually identical to problematic proposed legislation called the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act. The legislation, just like this executive order, was marketed as addressing the very real threat of anti-Semitism on campuses, but the only real world impact would have been to chill the freedom of speech of critics of Israel on campus. And that's what this EO will do. By defining a broad range of criticism of Israel as anti-Semitic, the order empowers Trump administration officials to penalize campuses for not sufficiently policing debate and discussion about Israel. At J Street, we understand that anti-Semitism is a scourge, and we're committed to fighting vociferously against it in all its forms. But this EO and the legislation it's based on are not about fighting anti-Semitism. They are about redefining anti-Semitism to stifle free speech. Working alongside of the ACLU, anti-Semitism scholars and other partners, J Street succeeded in blocking this harmful legislation from passing in Congress. So now President Trump has circumvented us and Congress by issuing an executive order. Even Kenneth S. Stern, the expert who drafted the definition of anti-Semitism adopted by this executive order, has publicly opposed its application to college campuses, writing that if this bill becomes law, students and faculty will be scared into silence and administrators will err on the side of suppressing or censoring speech. Meanwhile, Sex is Real J.K. Rowling champions a woman fired for defying transgender demands by simply asserting that sex is real. A tweet by the influential author of the Harry Potter stories affirming her position was posted after a UK employment judge allowed an employer to fire a woman to saying a man's claim to have an opposite sex gender does not actually change his biological sex. The UK judge declared the fired woman, Maya Forstater, is absolutist in her view of sex, and it is a core component of her belief that she will refer to a person by the sex she considered appropriate, even if it violates their dignity and or creates an intimidating, hostile, degrading, humiliating, or offensive movement. The approach is not worthy of respect in a democratic society, the judge declared. The judge's moral claim prompted much pushback among women who say women's rights depend on a clear recognition that women's sex and biology are different from men's sex and biology, even though both sexes are different in a complementary and equal fashion. Rowland tweeted her support for Forstatter's free speech. Dress however you please, call yourself whatever you like, sleep with any consulting adult who will have you, live your best life in peace and security, but force women out of their jobs for stating that sex is real. I agree with her. This is completely absurd. Now Rowling is being accused of transphobia after supporting fired researcher Mia Forstater for starters. Forstater was fired from her position at the Center for Global Development, where she worked from 2015 to 2018, after she was accused of transphobia for remarks she made on Twitter, including men cannot change into women. Louisa, your thoughts about any of the above?
Okay, I mean, again, this is trying to divide us. Their goal is to divide us among gender, and this is one of, I mean, this is one of them, to even divide our genders and what gender is, and the whole, debate over even, the athletic competition. It's, women's competition, folks. I'm going on the record, and whether you like this or not, women's competition is XX versus XX. That's what it's about. It's not about a political label. It's about genetics. And men's competition is XY versus XY. That's the truth. They want to distort and invert anything God-given. This is the Satanists. These are the ones who run the country. These are the ones, Soros' agenda to divide, to conquer, to destroy the United States. And this is who the Democrats this is where the Democrats get their power from and their money from. I mean, in some cases, but they get sucked into the whole. It's very dark, folks. Wait until you see what's going to come out. It's very dark, and when you see them doing things like this and starting splitting hairs on what gender is, there's nothing good that comes out of that, folks. Nothing good. It's my opinion. Just based on fact. Based on facts.
Louisa. Meanwhile, it begins.
Oh, yeah.
It's the most serious development of our time right now.
Mm-hmm.
Virginia forms active militia to protect sheriff citizens from unconstitutional laws. Things are getting really bad in Virginia, but this group isn't going down without a fight. Here's a summary of what's happening in Virginia. Let's look at all these facts together. With Michael Bloomberg's help, the Democrats took over the Virginia State Congress. There's an anti-paramilitary bill that would disallow armed people to gather or teach others how to use firearms or any technique that could cause injury or death. There's a bill that would make semi-automatic weapons illegal. Nearly the entire state, apart from the highly populated areas that elected these yahoos, has balked and formed Second Amendment sanctuaries. A legislator threatened the sanctuaries with the National Guard. The sanctuaries responded by activating and organizing a militia. The only way to prevent bloodshed and save face for the Congress and governor is for these bills not to pass. That would be difficult, though, given the fact that Bloomberg dumped millions of dollars into getting people elected who promised to pass strict gun control bills. If they suddenly vote against the bill, they will have to face their angry constituents in the wrath of Bloomberg. Rural Virginians seem unlikely to back down or are willing to fight. They have another month to get organized to defend their communities. This strategy was orchestrated by someone with a lot of money and power. This is something that has been thought through, perhaps even by gun control advocate and presidential candidate Michael Bloomberg. The reason I'm suggesting Bloomberg specifically is his PAC donated millions and millions to turn the legislatures of 24 states to a Democratic majority. His millions worked in 21 of those cases, and Virginia is among them. Packing the state legislatures with allies would help his agenda should he actually become the next president. Records filed so far show that organization controlled and funded by Mr. Bloomberg spent more than $41 million on 24 House races, much of it on eye-catching ads rolled out on social media and broadcast on television in the crucial final days of the campaign. And while it's impossible to conclude that any one factor tipped the balance in a race, Mr. Bloomberg appears to have reaped the benefits of his millions in giving Democrats won 21 of the 24 races he sought to influence. Of those, 12 had been considered either toss-ups or in Republican districts. The mission was to flip the House. Success or failure would be defined by that, said Howard Wilson, a senior advisor to Bloomberg. Bloomberg is rabidly anti-gun and has said that ending the national madness of U.S. gun violence is the impetus behind his run for the White House. If he were to be elected, may God help America, because he will destroy everything for which our nation has ever stood. Discussing Northam is misleading the public. Discussing the governor's proposed ban, Northam's spokeswoman Alina Termosky told the Mercury, in this case, the governor's assault weapon ban will include a grandfather clause for individuals who already own assault weapons, with a requirement they register their weapons before the end of a designated grace period. The website also reported the Northam-backed plan mirrors a federal assault weapon ban passed in 1994, which included a grandfather clause for weapons that were legally owned when the legislation was enacted. The federal ban expired in 2004. It's not clear whether the Mercury has been misled by Northam's staff or whether the paper is misinformed on the matter of gun law in general, but this paragraph is directly contradicted by Termosky's statement. Under the 1994 Clinton assault weapon ban, gun owners could continue to possess and transfer prohibited firearms that were lawfully possessed prior to the ban, in direct contrast to the purported Northam proposal. The federal ban had no firearm registration requirement. Opinion: VA Governor Northam plays the globalist role by SP. I suspect that's Steve Pacini. What follows is supposition from a few data points and some guesses on how things work. One, a great deal of money from Bloomberg's national PAC was focused to swing several key states this last election. Virginia has always been a red state due to the large number of rural counties. Virginia turned blue for the first time in this last election, led by the metropolitan areas of Washington, D.C. suburbs and Virginia Beach. The governor and both branches of the legislature are now Democratic controlled. Two, Bloomberg's major issue is the anti-gun platform. He represents, in my humble opinion, the globalist faction that simply cannot lock down control of a population that remains armed. Three, despite being historically one of the most passionately pro-gun states in the country, radical gun restriction legislation was launched in Virginia. I suspect Northam was given the task by his globalist masters and funders of taking the huge, high-risk, high-reward gamble of clearing this key state of weapons. We will put you into the governorship if you will clear the state of assault weapons and militias. Virginia is to be the bold first step of clearing the country of weapons and gun nuts. One, he will either succeed, be proclaimed a master of strategy with excellent leadership skills, and offered a reward of some high office, a presidency, perhaps head of the CIA cabinet position or such too, or he will fail and go down in ignominy, his career in shambles, remembered as a fool who failed to judge the population correctly and who precipitated the Civil War with his miscalculation. The oligarchy takes care of the professional class that serves their goals. He will retire wealthy regardless of the outcome. Three, or chaos will be unleashed and the globalists will need to call in the military to restore order and suppress the homegrown terrorists of rural Virginia. Store food and water. Can you endure a disruption of the system upon which you depend for sustenance? Louisa, I have more on this if you want me to continue. Mike Adams, you have no idea what's coming. Virginia Dems to unleash martial law attack on Second Amendment counties using roadblocks to confiscate firearms and spark a shooting war. Mike Adams. After passing extremely restrictive anti-gun legislation in 2020, Virginia has a plan to deploy roadblocks at both the county and state level to confiscate firearms from law-abiding citizens at gunpoint, of course, as part of a deliberate effort to spark a shooting war with citizens, sources are now telling Natural News. Some might choose to dismiss such claims as speculation, but these sources now say Virginia has been chosen as a deliberate flashpoint to ignite the Civil War being engineered by globalists. Their end game is to unleash a sufficient amount of violence to call for UN occupation of America and the overthrow of President Trump and the Republic. Such action will, of course, also result in the attempted nationwide confiscation of all firearms from private citizens, since all gun owners will be labeled domestic terrorists if they resist. Such language is already being used by Democrat legislators in the state of Virginia. The Democrat-run impeachment of President Trump is a necessary component for this plan. since the scheme requires Trump supporters to be painted as enraged domestic terrorists who are seeking revenge for the impeachment. This is how the media will spin the story when armed Virginians stand their ground and refuse to have their legal firearms confiscated by police state goons running Fourth Amendment violating roadblocks on Virginia roads. Gun confiscation roadblocks are almost sure to start a shooting war. Roadblocks will be set up in two types of locations: on roads entering the state of Virginia from neighboring states that have very high gun ownership, such as Kentucky, Tennessee, and North Carolina, and main roads, highways, and interstates that enter the pro-2A counties, which have declared themselves to be Second Amendment sanctuaries. With over 90 counties now recognizing some sort of pro-2A sanctuary status, virtually the entire state of Virginia will be considered enemy territory by the tyrants in Richmond who are trying to pull off this insidious scheme. As the map shows below, every green county has passed a pro-2A resolution of one kind or another. As you can see, nearly the entire state is pro-2A, completely surrounding the Democrat tyrants who run the capital of Richmond. The purpose of the roadblocks, to repeat, has nothing to do with public safety or enforcing the law. It's all being set up to spark a violent uprising against the Virginia Democrats and whatever law enforcement goons are willing to go along with the unconstitutional demands that violate fundamental civil rights of Virginia citizens. Over 90 Virginian counties, cities, and principalities have so far declared themselves to be pro-2A regions, meaning they will not comply with the gun confiscation tyranny of Governor Northam and his Democratic lackeys. Democrats in Virginia have threatened to activate the National Guard to attack pro-2A terrorists, and a recent statement from the Guard unit in Virginia confirms that the Guard has no intention to resist Governor Northam's outrageous orders, even if they are illegal or unconstitutional. One county in Virginia, Tazewell, has already activated its own militia in response. As reported by firearmsnews.com. In addition to passing their Second Amendment sanctuary resolution, the county also passed a militia resolution. This resolution formalizes the creation and maintenance of a de facto civilian militia in the county of Tazewell. To get a better understanding why the council members passed this resolution, Firearms News reached out to one of its members, Thomas Lester. Mr. Lester, a member of the council, as well as a professor of American history and political studies. Councilman Lester, what are the reasons behind passing this new resolution? What does it mean for the people of Tazewell County? Where's all this really headed? The bottom line of the enemies of America is to transform the country into UN-occupied war zone where UN troops go door to door, confiscating weapons from the American people. President Trump will be declared an illegitimate dictator and accused of war crimes, since Democrats and the media have already proven they can dream up any crime imaginable and accuse the president of that crime without any basis in fact. As we know from the Dems, if they can't rule America, they will seek to destroy it. Causing total chaos is their next best option to resisting Trump's expert to drain the swamp, since the Dems know they can't defeat Trump in an honest election. Expect Virginia to be the ignition point for all of this. Even the undercover cops who work there are now warning about what's coming. WesternJournal.com. Virginia's Democratic politicians appear to be ready to drive the state into a period of massive civil unrest with no regard for citizens' wishes. But conservatives in the Commonwealth will not be stripped of their rights without a fight. In the face of expected wide-reaching bans on so-called assault weapons, high-capacity magazines, and other arms protected under the Second Amendment, Virginians are standing up to Democratic tyranny. Franklin County, again, now has just passed a Second Amendment sanctuary resolution. Nevertheless, we have the Virginia 2A sanctuaries. New gun controls will be enforced. 86 out of 95 counties are against the new gun control plan. The Attorney General says the new law will be enforced. There will be an uprising in Virginia. Civil war won't be pretty. Minority rules. Meanwhile, as I've observed many times, when they come for our guns, the time has come to use them. Louisa.
No, you're absolutely right, Jim. I think they're planting a false flag there. You know, if you look at those districts in the map that you know, shared with us, Jim, those districts, all the green ones, they're going to lose their Democratic representatives. They will not be reelected because of what they're going to do, you know, here. This is self-destruction, of course, of the Democrat Party. This is more of it, but you know, they're going to be the provocateurs, though. I mean, they're going to be probably the ones that fire the first shot. And blame it on, you know, blame it on any of the militias that try to show up to defend themselves, or any of the people who try to show up to defend themselves. They'll accuse, you know, the citizens of firing the first shot.
It's absolutely stunning, Louisa, but that's where it stands today. That ends my report for our session now, and I am terribly, terribly concerned. I believe in the First Amendment. I believe in the Second Amendment. We're undergoing a massive assault on both that are led by the mainstream media, by the social media giants, and by misguided Democrats who are seeking to sabotage the Constitution on a wide range of grounds. This has gotten completely out of hand. They cannot prevail.
Well, you know, they've been trying for a civil war for quite some time. They haven't been able to really spark one. And this, you know, look, I don't think the president is going to. The president has said that he's never going to let them take our guns. But this is, you know, Washington, D.C. basically is in Virginia. So this is, you know, why the battle is happening there, because they don't want their crimes exposed. This is another distraction, you know, but I'll tell you, every time, you know, they delay and delay and delay the inevitable. It causes a lot more pain and destruction. I think people are starting to finally wake up, Jim. I think that, you know, look, I can say people who I never thought would wake up, I'm starting to see a glimmer of hope. A glimmer of hope, Jim, that they're starting to see through, you know, these false flags, and starting to see there's other, you know, nefarious agenda going on with at least the Democrats at this point.
I think Pelosi's decision to not send the articles of impeachment to the Senate will go down as one of the great political blunders of our time. It exposes the whole thing as a fraud, a hoax, a joke, and that was never serious. And now these moves in Virginia against the Second Amendment are absolutely stunning. And frankly, I believe they are crossing the line in Virginia. And the Virginian people in support of the Constitution aren't going to let them get away with it.
Yeah, and you know, we're talking about projection because that's what they're doing. And you know, in my textbook, because you know, I went to graduate school for psychology. This is the Essential Psychotherapy and Its Treatment Manual, and I also have the DSM-5 right here. And I just happened to look it up because it's been a while since I looked up projection. And I'll just tell you that it says it's the unconscious rejection of unacceptable thoughts, traits, or wishes by ascribing them to others. So this is a defense mechanism, and so they don't want to think of themselves as being criminals, so they're going to project that on other people when they are criminals. And look, they're trying these false flags, folks. Be aware, stay alert, be vigilant, see something, say something. If you're in Virginia, we're praying with you and praying for you because we don't know how this is going to unfold. But you know, they're drawing the lines. They're taking, you know, for a civil war, Jim.
How incredibly stupid this is. In rural counties, you have many isolated farmhouses where if they don't have weapons, they're totally at the mercy of gangs from urban centers to rape and loot and rob and murder. The idea of them giving up their guns would be completely insane. It would be like committing suicide. And that these Democrats, led by Michael Bloomberg, are making this move is existential for the rural communities. They aren't going to allow it to happen. They understand the stakes. The Democrats have grossly underestimated American resistance to these unconstitutional moves against the First and Second Amendment.
I know, Jim, we are so patient. We have put up with so much, but there's a point in time when we're going to fight back. And Virginia is a big, beautiful state. I mean, I've driven through there even just recently. It is a beautiful state. It's got, the Appalachian Mountains and some of the Smoky Mountains towards the south. There are very rural areas in there, because I'm always very concerned about driving those long roads on like Interstate 81 south, at night and in bad weather and stuff. And they're very rural areas, like you're saying, with no other way to defend themselves. Look, folks, keep an eye on Virginia, send them your prayers, and, now is the line. This is the fight for, this is our second American Revolution right now. This is the fight for our republic, and we must win it, folks. We cannot let the socialist, communists take over, fascists, you name it. So this is it. So Jim, thank you. Excellent report. Thank you so much, my friend. Happy holidays to everybody. Merry Christmas. We have Christmas this week. Jim, I hope you have a lovely holiday, you and your lovely wife.
And best for the new year, Louisa, 2020, though we're going to have another program before that time comes.
Right. Jim's going to present top 10 stories, and we'll be back next week for that. So everybody or Sunday for that. And so everybody have a great time. Have a safe holiday. Be safe, folks. Be safe with your drinking, and be careful out there with driving and stuff like that. And we will see all of you soon. We're going to be doing we're also going to have a special New Year's Eve simulcast broadcast with Ascension Radio. We'll be doing that. And it's going to be very interesting. We're going to be focusing on space and space policy and all things to do with space, and of course the new year. So we got a lot to present for you. Tune in, stay tuned, and have a happy holiday. And this concludes this edition of the GoldFish Report.